So we got let's recap Lemekh. Lemekh is halfway between Cain and the flood. Cain commits a crime of passion, and I spoke about this is sort of like a storyline of the deterioration of mankind in terms of sin, of crime. Adam and the woman commit a crime, sort of a crime, just a sin, breaking a law that seems arbitrary and that doesn't affect anyone. They eat from the fruit, no harm done, but they broke the law. Then Cain commits a crime of passion. Then Lemekh comes along and says, "Ish harakti lefitzei v'yered lechaburati." I killed those who raised the hand against me. The punishment is not proportionate, but he says it with pride, as if to say, "This is how I'm going to act in the future." He establishes the rule of violence, the rule of force. This is what he's going to do. And his name Lemekh is symbolic. It's Melech backwards or distorted. There maybe Ada and Tzila are also symbolic. I'm not so sure about that. There is interesting midrash. Rashi comments on Ada v'Tzila that the word Ada is related to the word Adiat in Aramaic, which means pregnancy, and Tzila means shadow or shade. And he says this was the practice of that generation. They would have two wives, one to bear children for them, and another one to just for pleasure. It didn't work for him because both of them bore him children. But maybe what Rashi is onto is something that I think we spoke about when we talk about the laws of marriage and divorce in the Torah. And that's the idea that Torah is really, the Torah tries to focus the love and romance and the holiness of marriage, of the relation between a man and a woman in the house and not in the temple. Because this kind of a dual life, Ada v'Tzila, the way Rashi describes it, is pleasure and business, right? One wife for children, one wife for pleasure. In the ancient Near East, there was also the practice of kadesh and kadesha, the cultic prostitution in the temple, which was basically the same. A man would have his wife at home for business. She would bear his children and tend to the house, and he would go to the temple to be kivyachol, as if it were religious, but to have his pleasure. So the Torah stops that. It says focus it in the house. So maybe, I don't know, it not necessarily starts there, but it could be that the Midrash knew of something along these lines. But anyway, Lemekh is also the father of civilization, because his children, Yaval, Yuval, and Tuval Cain, and Naama, are representatives of major branches of activity. The first shepherd, agriculture; the first blacksmith represents technology; the first musician, who represents communication and education; and Naama, pleasantness, that maybe symbolizes leisure and relaxation. However, after Lemekh, things go downhill, and very quickly we get to the story of the flood, and this is also where things get complicated in terms of validating the biblical story versus the scientific truth or scientific evidence, right? It becomes a little complicated for two reasons. First of all, it doesn't fit the timeline. There's no evidence that a cataclysmic event like the flood took place 5,000 years ago. This is more or less when it should have happened according to the Torah. And second, there are other problems. Another problem is that the whole idea of total annihilation doesn't really sit well with the theology of the Torah. In many places we see that God is El Rahum ve'Hanun, Erech Hapayim ve'Rav Chesed ve'Emet. Hashem is merciful and gracious and he does not want to harm people. In the book of Yonah, he forgives the city of Nineveh and says, "How am I going to destroy 120,000 people?" And after the golden calf, he forgives Am Yisrael, and this is something that goes through Tanakh. So why here total annihilation of the whole world? So these are some of the problems. Also, biblical criticism found out that there are sort of like competing versions. Were there 7 animals or 2 animals? What were the exact dates that the Mabul started and ended? This is too, for me, too complicated to entangle the story of the flood in the textual sense. But I am always intrigued by the question of, right, how the Mabul fits in, and also how do we explain the similarity to all the flood myths from the ancient Near East, especially the Babylonian story, the epic of Gilgamesh. So when people say we borrowed it from the Babylonians, does anyone have any more kushiyot, any more questions on the flood? Not answer, just questions on the flood before we continue. Orev. Oh, Shai recalls the Orev. Shai happened to have a roommate called Orev, right? Not so she was not your roommate, okay. An Israeli woman who decided to call herself Orev, but you sent her away. It's good. Um, yeah. So the story. What did Noah send out? Was it a dove or a raven? Uh, it's not clear what happened there. But I'm not trying to answer this. Um, I'd rather want to try to look at the flood. So one of my colleagues who lived in Brooklyn, David, you know him, Rabbi Ralphie, many years ago, published an article about the flood, saying that the flood uh, did not cover the whole world. It was not a global event. It was a local event. And the backlash that he received from the rabbinic community in Brooklyn was horrible. I mean, you might as well say that you don't have to eat shmura matzah on Pesach. It's really an act of heresy. Or uh, that you can't eat bagel. I don't know, something like that. It's a very heretical statement. And even though he tried to support his argument by midrashic literature, the rabbis themselves say in the midrash that the flood did not affect Eretz Yisrael, which is a physical marvel. I mean, the flood is interesting, but can you think of the whole world is covered in water, and then there's an area the shape of Eretz Yisrael where there's a pillar of air that goes all the way up. This is an amazing miracle. Should have been mentioned, just like the parting of Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds. So there are many theories. I have my favorite that I'm going to share with you. You might have heard it before, maybe even from me, but I'll say it briefly and I'll go through it. Starting with Professor Casuto first. Again, going to Professor Menahem or Umberto Casuto, who was a pioneer in this field of trying to reconcile the documentary hypotheses and to explain the myths and their relationship to the biblical narrative. So Casuto said that there were certain stories that were well known in the Middle East, in the ancient Near East, and therefore the Torah had to reference them. And if the Torah would not have referenced them, people would question the validity of the book. Like, everybody knows there was a flood. Everybody knows there was a flood. So therefore, if you give me a book about the creation of the world and the generation that came after the creation of the world, and you fail to mention the flood, the book is not authentic, right? So this is the basic premise of Casuto, and in other things as well, and he points out several differences between the biblical story and the Babylonian myth. Most important are these. According to the Babylonian myth, the gods decided to annihilate humanity because humans were too noisy and they disturbed the gods while the gods were taking their afternoon nap. What? Shai is shocked. You should have seen my father when, the rare times when he had a break from the army and he would be home during the week and he would take his afternoon nap, and the kids of the neighbors would play stanga, which is like the Jerusalem football, soccer that you play in the narrow streets, with the tennis ball between two sidewalks. If they would become too noisy, he would run out of the house, yell at them. They would scatter everywhere. They're scared out of their wits. So that idea of an adult trying to nap and the children bothering him, and he gets very, very upset. I've seen it when I was a kid. So, but in the Babylonian myth, this is what happens, and the gods decide to destroy humanity, and they pick up Utnapishtim because he's a favorite, and there's a actually fight between them. One goddess picks him up, and the other one is upset with her for taking him, and eventually. So that's one main difference. In the biblical story, the flood comes as a result of Hamas, of injustice. So it's not a punishment for humanity as much as it tells you symbolically that humanity cannot survive with a structure of injustice, and it has to be taken care of. The other important element in the story where we see a difference is that in the Babylonian myth, after the flood is over and the humans bring sacrifice to the gods, the gods are described like flies or dogs that are attracted to the food, while in the Torah we read Vayara Hashem et re'ach hanihoach, and God smelled the sweet aroma, which I know is strange, but I think that it is meant for God to distance Himself from the sacrifices as much as possible. The korbanot are always described as re'ach. Re'ach, smell, is a sort of abstract and close to ruach, spirit. So the Torah wants to say God does not eat the korbanot. It's more a spiritual thing, and the complete opposite of what the Babylonians believed. They are feeding the gods. So in the Babylonian myth, the gods are basically humans on steroids, right? They're superpowered humans. They have the same desires, and the same with the Greek pantheon. The same desires, the same habits and vices, favorites, jealousy, etc. And they come for the food like dogs. And you have to feed them, because if you don't feed them, they will turn against you. So this is what Kasuto says. But still there's a problem. There's a problem with when you ask just when did the flood happen? We know that there's a Babylonian myth. But what are the roots of the Babylonian myth? And why do we have those similarities, and how it was carried into the Torah? So, any question, comments here before I continue? Good.
Say.
Yeah.
Could have been with Ice Age.
Right. So it could have been right. So, but if it's the Ice Age, it's way before the time of allegedly of Noah, and so once you go there, we have to admit that the story is symbolic. We have to admit that Noah and Shem and Ham and Yefet and the ark never were, not the way the Torah tells the story. It's a hard thing for people to do, but we should prepare ourselves to that, to do that. Just think about one detail, okay? How do you fit the animals in the ark? You build the ark with these dimensions and think how many animals you could fit there with their food to last a whole year. And not to suffer from what is it called, when lack of vitamin C, that sailors
Scurvy.
Scurvy, right? I always remember the name in Hebrew, it's Afdina, but that's right? So scurvy.
Oh, it's
The
already a miracle.
what?
It's already doing miracle.
Oh, but God didn't really perform miracles for Noah. That's obvious. If God would have wanted to save Noah miraculously, he would, or even without such a great miracle, he would just stop the waters, 200 feet under the peak of one of the mountains, and let Noah live there, more freely. Why does he squeeze Noah into a little ark, bobbing on the water for a whole year? God didn't like Noah that much. I don't think so. He was upset with him.
Yeah, because he wasn't.
Look at what? Look at us now. We are almost. This is the maybe closest experiment, to Tevat Noah. We are now. No, seriously, we are at home now for 9 months, more or less, right? And soon it will be a year, and we're going crazy, and that is with the ability to go out, to come back in. For some of us, to drive sometimes, to see some people outside our house, to have this kind of communication. Can you imagine 9 people? No, 9 people, 8 people. Noah, his wife, 3 sons and 3 wives or 3 daughters-in-law. Right. So actually, it's worse. It's not just people. It's the family. It's a Seder night or Thanksgiving that goes on for a year in a road trip on the water while feeding animals, and you can't get off. Can you imagine this would drive you crazy. Now there's a lot of I'm bringing analogies just to try to visualize how hard this experience of being in the Teva is. Okay, there's a lot of talk about going to Mars and starting a colony on Mars, etc. One of the main impediments of sending humans to Mars is not the technology. It's the human condition. It's the question of how will people be able to get along in a capsule for 9 months, because it takes about 9 months to get there. On board a spaceship or a space vessel, I think it's 9 months, right? If someone please check the facts and let me know. I think that's what the last I know. At least that was on the offer that they sent me. They said your wife recommended you for a trip to Mars. She stays here, and you could go and not come back. I'm kidding. She didn't do that. She's afraid of flying. No, but that was the joke. People, they said they need volunteers, and a lot of people volunteered their friends. Just take them to Mars, and that's it.
9 months.
But what?
9 months.
9 months. Is that right? So this is the challenge. You would have thought, okay, 9 months you could survive, but they're still doing experiments to see how the crew would survive without killing each other. So can you imagine a father, a mother, 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law on one ship taking care of the animals for 1 year? That's not a miracle. I mean, the miracle is that they survived. But God did not, if God wanted to save Noah and he was his favorite, that's not the way to do it. So anyway, the book that I read and really convinced me regarding the flood is a book called Noah's Flood by William Ryan. And he has a co-author. They're both scientists. They did thorough research for many, many, many years. And they did not leave a stone unturned. Seriously, they researched everything that could be done, in the area in terms of the Babylonian myths, other stories, the regions where this could have happened, the geological layers to see if there was a cataclysmic event. They even one of them is a marine biologist. So, Eduardo is not with us. So okay, I could confirm with him. But as the marine biologist looked for evidence that there was an influx of sweet water into the ocean that would have changed the composition of the sea creatures at the bottom and the residue on the bottom of the sea, and you can't find that. There's no evidence for a cataclysmic event the way the Torah describes it 5,000 years ago. But like Daphna said, maybe the Ice Age, there is an event that took place about 10,000 years ago, and which is documented. I mean, sort of like echoes of remnants of it remain in folk tales, and there's also evidence, physical evidence of its occurrence, and that is that about 10,000 years ago, the place that we know today as the Black Sea was an empty crater. Are you sure we did not discuss it in our class here? No? Okay, good. I'm sometimes okay. So the Black Sea was an empty crater, probably caused by a meteor that that hit Earth. So there's an empty crater, and there's a crevice, sort of an underground canyon that connects that crater to the Mediterranean, which is full. So now you have two vessels. One is full, it's the Mediterranean, and one is empty, the Black Sea. And there's a thin channel that connects them. And the waters of the Mediterranean trickle into the bottom of that crater. There's a lake there, and people live on the slopes of the crater. It's a huge, huge territory. And the forces of nature, we know we speak about sea surface, the water aspires to be at the same level, right? There's this experiment in physics that we all do in elementary school, called in Hebrew kelim shluvim. There are vessels that are connected. You pour water into them; they will all level at one point, and they'll be at the same level. So the water of the Mediterranean are trying to push their way into that crater in the Black Sea, and they start trickling, and they get stronger and stronger. That stream becomes stronger and stronger, and that is something that remains until today. It is recorded in the story about Jason and the Argonauts, which I think is part of either of the Odyssey of the Iliad. I'm not sure which epic it appears, but in the story, Jason and the Argonauts are sailing up the river from the Dardanelles, inland, and the way they do it, they lower a barrel from the ship because there's an undercurrent. They're going against the current, but there's an undercurrent that goes their way, and if you lower a barrel and you direct its opening in the right way, the water will push you. And the sailors in Turkey still know that trick until today. So there are two currents, it's very rare, that are going in opposite directions, and this is a remnant of that event 10,000 years ago, that the lower stream goes from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, even though the Black Sea is a little higher, and the upper current goes from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So now when that happens, we try to picture like people living in that, like a soup bowl, right? This crater, they live on the slopes, and they see the water rising slowly. Now, after a month or so, who knows how long it took, but after a while, the assumption is, and here it's theory, like what exactly people did, or how many people did what they did. We don't know, but we know that it is obvious that they split into three groups. Some people stayed there and thought nothing will happen. There's always a group like that, and they perished. Some people fled before the whole thing. They said, "Okay, something bad is happening here. We don't understand it. Let's run away while we can." And there's a third group who said, "We don't know that it's going to happen, and it's a hassle to take all our stuff from here up there. So we're going to build rafts, put our stuff on it, and if the water rises, we'll go up with the water. Right? It's very simple. And this is what happened. Just that when the water came, the people on the rafts weren't so lucky. It wasn't easy because the water came in rushing. And that's where the first clue that we have, which is in the Torah. I'm going to go to the text. We'll use Sefaria today. What is the proof that the flood started not as rain, but as an undercurrent, as water gushing in from underneath the earth? Yeah, does anyone remember this pasuk in how the Bible starts?
Springs opened up under.
Right. So in chapter 7, in verse 11, we read this: in the 600th year, it's a round number, you realize. In the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the sky broke open. And the commentators struggle with this pasuk. Why the springs of the deep open up? Why not the rain? The answer is because it did come from the deep. It was the gush of water coming from the Mediterranean, and for people, what they saw, that was like the water is coming from nowhere and they're rising from the ground up. Why does it rain? Because this influx of water at such quantity lowers the temperature, and it would start raining. So now they have water from beneath and from above, and they're trying to run away. And some people made it out, and some people perished. A lot of people made it out. No, we don't know if in the tens of thousands, maybe in the thousands. And what happened to those people? They scattered in a sort of in a circle around the Black Sea, because everybody, wherever you got out and you kept running. Can you imagine that? You live there quietly for who knows how many years, and all of a sudden this the tsunami comes from the ground up and just throws you out like a volcano of water. It's scary. I think, Shana, you're the only one who saw a volcano, right? Did you see a volcano erupt in your neighborhood recently?
No, I think over ours.
But next island over is close enough, right? And it's scary. So imagine not lava of molten rock, but lava of water. It's very scary. So people got out of the crate, out of this now full Black Sea, and they keep running and running and running until they find a place to settle down. And I'm giving you the simplified version. If you want to read the story, the book is fascinating. I highly recommend it, Noah's Flood by William Ryan. And maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm totally wrong. It's fine. I'm just giving you a theory. Definitely not a definitive interpretation, but to me, this theory works well. So, and that is based on now, what I'm telling you now is based on the terms of the gushing of water into the Black Sea is documented based on the currents, undercurrents of the Bosphorus, and also the residue of seashells in that area. And the scattering of the people from that crate all over the world is also documented by archaeological findings, because they had the people who lived in the crate had a specific style of pottery called monolinear. They had one line of decoration at the top of their vessels, and shards of this pottery were found in a circle around the Black Sea. It's almost like you could map out where did they go. Look for the shards, and you see the map. There's a radius around the Black Sea. Some people, the places that we know that people got to. Some people got to Hungary. Some people got the furthest that people ran away was the Gobi Desert in China, and a lot of people settled in Babylonia. Now, the the myth of the flood survived only in Babylonia, mainly there, not in other places. Why did it disappear in China? For among the tribes who made it to China, this myth disappeared. Why? Because if you live in the desert, right, in the Gobi Desert, I think it's the biggest desert in the world. You live there and you tell your children that as a child, you had to run away from a gigantic flood. Okay? How are they going to believe you? Even if they do, if they tell it to their grandchildren, right, they would put them in an institute if they had one. So with time, the story dies out because there's nothing real to validate it. But for the people who fled to Babylonia, there was something that kept the story alive, and actually, this something misled some scholars at the beginning to think that the whole flood is about the flooding of the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, because those are rivers that annually almost inundate the surrounding area. So the truth is that it didn't happen there. It happened in the Black Sea, but the people who went to Babylonia preserved the myth because it kept happening every year on a much smaller scale. Now, that it was the Black Sea also explains why the Teva, the ark, eventually rests on Hare Ararat, which is in that region. So all in all, the Torah includes the story because people know the story. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the textual differences. I didn't investigate much, and I don't have a clear answer on why we have 2 animals, 7 animals, the raven and the dove, and some contradicting dates. In general, I would say the Torah wrote it that way to tell us not to take the story literally. Rather, what we take from the story is the message. So, in other words, the Torah had to put it there because people knew the story, but the Torah wanted to give us a message in the way that it included the story in the narrative. So let's go to the text and see what is the Torah tells us before and after the deed. Not so much during the flood itself, but before and after. So let me put it first side by side. It's easier. Yeah. Okay. So I said we ended with Lemekh, and then in chapter 6 we read this: when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among those who pleased them. That's the behavior of mankind. Vayomer Adonai lo yadon ruhi ba'adam le'olam. My breath shall not abide in men forever. Beshagam hu basar, since he too is flesh. Vayu yamav 120 shana, and I allow him 120 years to live. The word beshagam is enigmatic. It's a because of, but it's not clear why this word appears here. Maybe it's sort of a remnant of the Babylonian. I'll ask, is Massimo with us? Menachem, you please let me know later if Shagam. It just occurred to me it could be that the Shagam has an Akkadian origin, and sort of like it's the hook to tell us there's something here. And then we read this: Hanefilim ayu ba'aretz bayamim ahem. וגם אחרי כן אשר יבואו בני האלוהים אל בנות האדם וילדו להם הם הגיבורים אשר מעולם אנשי השם. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men who bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. And then וירא אדוני כי רבה רעת האדם בארץ, and Hashem saw that man's wickedness on earth is great, and he devises evil plans all day, and he decides, I'm going to destroy him. So those are really interesting psukim. There are many theories about the Nephilim. In Christianity, they became the fallen angels. Some esoteric Hebrew literature also sort of appropriated the story of the fallen angel Azav Azael or Sham Hazai, all kind of weird stories. What do we make of that story? My theory is that it goes on with the same. Yes, Daphna?
Yeah, I was just going to say if it was like if the time frame is off, then there were other strands of humanity.
Right. This is one theory which I think is plausible, that we're not clear on how it works in terms of the evolutionary development of mankind, but it could be that we talk about different tribes and different different development of mankind. Then those who were more powerful took advantage of those who were less powerful. That's very probable. So in that case, the Nephilim would people of great stature would come and take advantage of the smaller people. It's very possible. The other thing, the first pasuk of that paragraph that I read, that speaks about Bnei Elohim and Benot Adam, I think should be understood not as divine beings, but rather as Elohim in the sense of judges, the sons of the judges, and Benot Adam are the daughters of the commoners. So what we see here is a description of society. So now there's a shift from Adam, Cain, and Lemekh, who are individuals, but Lemekh is the one who sort of started creating a society based on his power, right? And here's the first society that we see in Bereshit, the society of the generation before the flood, and it's a skewer society where it's an oligarchy. The people who are the judges, who have the power, take advantage of the weaker layers of society, and that is injustice, and it fits with the definition of injustice in the Torah in general, which is you could say government-sponsored injustice, discrimination against some of the citizens or the inhabitants of the land. So, what the Torah tells us is that unlike the Babylonian myth, the destruction here comes because of the failure of mankind. And then we see Noah. Noah is a righteous man. He's chosen to be saved because he's righteous, not because he's a favorite of the gods, but the way in which he's being saved is very harsh. Noah is squeezed into an ark with his family, with all the animals that he has to feed. Why? Because Noah doesn't care about others. He's the righteous person who cares only about himself. And I don't want to be too harsh on Noah. I know some people would want to defend him, but remember that Noah is a fictitious character. He was created in order to deliver a message. The other character which appears with Noah in the Tanakh later on is Eov. In the book of Yehezkel, the prophet speaks of Noah, Eov, and Daniel. And remember that when we spoke of Eov, what typifies Eov is selfishness, is focus on himself. How do I save myself? How do I make sure that I'm not punished? So maybe Noah is of the same mentality, and that's why God saves him in a way that forces him to pay attention to others. But I think we'll stop here today, and we'll continue that discussion, B'ezrat Hashem, next week.